The First Parish Unitarian Church are going to toll their bells for approximately 2 minutes. This is in recognition of the anniversary of World War I. I think what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to read a proclamation from Governor Baker. Whereas since the Commonwealth colonial days, thousands of men and women have served our country in defense of freedom and liberty. Whereas on November 11th, the armistice was signed in the forest of Champagne by the Allied nations and Germany, ending World War I, the war to end all wars after 4 years of conflict. And whereas since that day, every November, people from around the nation have gathered to honor our veterans, and whereas at approximately 3,088,000,000 living in Massachusetts today have reminded us of the great sacrifices and contributions to our veterans have made to our country, and whereas we honor those and salute those who served our country and throughout the generations with honor, patriotism, courage, and whereas it is appropriate that all Massachusetts veterans remember the bravery of those who served their country and their dedication and sacrifices serve as a reminder of the cost of our freedom. And whereas in November 2018, the world will commemorate the 100th anniversary of the armistice that ended the fighting in World War I. At 1100 a.m., November the 11th, 1918, the 11th hour, the 11th day of the 11th month. Now therefore, I, Charles D. Baker, Governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, do hereby proclaim November 11th, 2018 to be Veterans Day, and urge all of the citizens of the Commonwealth to take cognizance of this event, participate fitting in its observance. Given at the Executive Chamber in Boston on the 11th day of November, the year 2018, of the independence of the United States of America, the 242nd. That is his proclamation. And you can hear the bells now ringing. We will now proceed with the program. On behalf of the town of Wayland, the Public Ceremonies Committee wishes to welcome all of you to our Veterans Day ceremony at our town memorial. We honor all veterans on this day of remembrance, especially those who have paid the supreme sacrifice to preserve our freedom. We will now begin with the program. Paul Rufo, you want to make some welcoming remarks?
Morning. Excuse me. Good morning. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming today. This is the 100th anniversary of World War I, and reflecting the last week or so about what was coming up. I want to thank everybody for being here. I also want to ask you something. We need to remember the cost of the freedom and the liberties that we get, and we are able to partake in. And that cost was paid in lives of our veterans who stood up and paid the ultimate sacrifice. If you see one today, if you see one anytime during the year, thank them. But also please make sure that we remember what the cost was for us to truly understand what we get to do in this country. We have to understand what the cost was to get there. And again, thank you all for coming.
We'll now have the invocation by Reverend Alan Baldwin of the Trinitarian Church.
Please join with me in asking God to bless our time together. O Lord of the nations, help us to be grateful for all you have given our country, in the beauty of the countryside from sea to sea, in our land's resources and much prosperity in their use, in protecting us in wartime, providing for us in peacetime, and extending your undeserved mercies at all times. Help us in this Veterans Day service to honor all those who serve and have served our country. May we likewise honor you who have blessed us in all these things. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Baldwin. We will now have remarks by Mr. Douglas Levine, member of the Board of Selectmen. Please sit down.
On behalf of the Wayland Board of Selectmen, we want to welcome you to today's Veterans Day program. We extend a special welcome to members of the American Legion and veterans of foreign wars. And a very warm welcome to our Boy Scouts, Troop 1, and Cub Scouts, Pack 1, who are participating in today's ceremony. Today, we honor the service of all those who have served in America's armed forces. This date marks a milestone anniversary of the end of World War I, the first Great War, which, as we heard, formally ended on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918, exactly 100 years ago. At the first Veterans Day, formerly known as Armistice Day, President Woodrow Wilson marked the nationwide address in which he proclaimed, "Out of this victory, there arose new possibilities of political freedom and economic concert. The war showed us the strength of great nations acting together for high purposes, and the victory of arms foretells the enduring conquest which can be made in peace when nations act justly and in furtherance of the common interests of men." President Wilson went on to say, "To us in America, the reflections of Armistice Day will be filled with solemn pride in the heroism of those who died in the country's service, and with gratitude for the victory, both because of the thing from which it has freed us, and because of the opportunity it has given America to show her sympathy with peace and justice in the councils of nations." We stand alongside the Wayland Veterans Memorial, which honors our fellow Wayland residents and all others who have bravely served in the United States military for their enduring gift of freedom to each of us. this day we honor all veterans. The Department of Veterans Affairs webpage notes that this day is a celebration to honor America's veterans for their patriotism, love of country, and willingness to serve and sacrifice for the common good. Each of us, whether a veteran or not, has a personal connection to the brave men and women who served our country over the years in the military. We are profoundly grateful to them. May this holiday help us to recognize and honor the sacrifice that veterans and their families have made throughout the history of our great nation and continue to make to this day. Thank you.
We will now have the national anthem sung by Arden Morgan. Please rise.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
We'll now have the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We will now have the remarks by Command Sergeant Major Michael Pentegro. Command Sergeant Major Michael Pentegro is the Command Sergeant Major at the Natick Soldier Systems Command. The garrison provides installation services in support of the Natick Soldier Systems Command's signature research and development and acquisition missions. CSM Pentegro joined the Army in 1996 and served subsequently in a wide variety of leadership and technical roles within his career specialty of public affairs. His overseas service includes missions in Kuwait, Korea, Germany, Romania, the Balkans, as well as Afghanistan. It is my pleasure to welcome Command Sergeant Major Pentegro.
Thank you for those kind, if overly generous remarks, Boats. If a naval petty officer with deep New England roots and a great accent can get along with an Army guy from Alabama, I guess there's hope yet for national unity. Distinguished guests, students, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I'm honored to spend this special day with great neighbors in a lovely historic town with roots in colonial New England and a legacy of military service more than a century older than the nation itself. A special thanks to the Public Ceremonies Committee, whose dynamic efforts made this event possible, as well as the Wayland Scouts, the Maestro, the Patriots of American Legion Post 133 for their outstanding contributions to today's program. Miss Morgan, thank you for that stirring rendition of our national anthem. I can't imagine a more apt soundtrack for the day's festivities. And now for our genuine guests of honor. Veterans of the United States Navy, please identify yourselves. Anchors away, my friends. We're the devil dogs, and they're always Marines. Semper Fi. How about our airmen? No one can stop them. Aim high. Any Coast Guardsmen? And our oldest service, first commanded by George Washington in Boston in 1775. Where are my fellow soldiers? Hoo-ah. Veterans of all our services, thank you for sharing your day with us. We're grateful for your service and your sacrifice, and we're inspired by your modesty, your courage, your devotion, and your example. A colonel from a nearby Massachusetts National Guard brigade dropped in on our installation last Thursday to speak during a very special observance. Now, Colonel Conaway's organization isn't any old support brigade. It's the direct descendant of a legendary formation that helped rescue the Allies during the latter stages of the conflict we know as World War I. A little background. Just over a century ago, Congress declared war on Germany and subsequently Austria-Hungary, triggering a wave of patriotic frenzy and the greatest mobilization of Americans since the Civil War. Like the Civil War, what became known as the Great War and later World War I touched the lives of virtually every American. Volunteers across New England poured into recruiting stations, probably a wise move since young men who didn't volunteer often received draft notices anyway. The war radically changed not only the lives of the volunteered and the voluntold, but American family life, industry, pop culture, even diets. Food is ammunition, don't waste it, proclaimed the Food Administration as it urged Americans to cultivate victory gardens and observe wheatless Mondays, meatless Tuesdays, porkless Saturdays. The Europeans called all Americans Yanks, and it was appropriate given the essential role New England played in the war effort. The famed 26th Infantry Division formed from the National Guards of the New England states in the summer of 1917, specifically for service in the ongoing war, which was already bleeding France, England, Russia, and Germany dry. Massachusetts elements of the 26th organized at camps in Boxford, Framingham, and Westfield. The 26th was promptly dubbed the Yankee Division by its first commander, Major General C.R. Edwards. The unit insignia, which featured a capital Y within a capital D, reinforced the point. The YD was the first full American Army division to deploy to France in the fall of 1917. Its men fought in 6 campaigns and spent more time on the front line than all but one other U.S. division. The 26th was known as one of the finest divisions in the American Expeditionary Force. All told, American doughboys, 108 of them from Wayland, fought in 13 campaigns during the conflict. By war's end, the U.S. suffered more than 300,000 casualties, which counts missing and wounded, including nearly 120,000 deaths in a conflict that proved yet more devastating to Europe and perhaps cataclysmic for Western civilization itself. 4 of the fallen were from Wayland. Calvin Coolidge, a lieutenant governor and governor of Massachusetts prior to his presidency, observed not long after the war that the nation which forgets its defenders will itself be forgotten. Your presence at this memorial demonstrates we have not forgotten our defenders. In the fall of 2016, we began a 2-year centennial commemoration of American involvement in World War I. That commemoration culminates now, the 100th anniversary of the war's end on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918. Our Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps are part of this commemoration. So are the veterans we honor today, as are the patriots who organize and conduct events like this. So is everyone who remembers, everyone who honors the sacrifices, and everyone who cares. The war to end all wars didn't. 2 decades later, general war again broke out in Europe, and 2 years after that, our nation again mobilized its families, farms, infrastructure, and industries for combat. Wayland again mobilized around 475 of its citizens, with men now joined by members of the Women's Auxiliary Corps, served in what became known as World War II. 16 made the ultimate sacrifice for their country, and several of those Gold Star families sent multiple sons to the war. Many Wayland families grieved the loss of one son, while others remained in combat. Those who served very often experienced the painful loss of friends and comrades, as well as fear, frustration, and privation. Some left compelling accounts of their experience and reflections on fallen brothers in arms. Carl Bischoff, an 18-year-old sailor from Wayland serving aboard a landing craft infantry ship on Omaha Beach during D-Day, vividly recalled an agonizing sight. The terrible destruction along the beach was a sight that I've never forgotten. What I'll also never forget was an LCI burning on the beach. It was the LCI skippered by our former captain, the old Navy man. His soldiers didn't get their feet wet. They and the crew got something worse. When we saw that LCI burning and realized that would have been us if we'd stayed with Humphrey Bogart. That was apparently the nickname of the previous commander who reminded them of the famous actor. Americans and allies celebrated the surrender of Japan and the end of the Second World War ecstatically in mid-August 1945, but the respite from war, sacrifice, and loss lasted less than 5 years. In late June of 1950, 75,000 soldiers from the North Korean People's Army invaded their kinsmen to the south, triggering a grueling 3-year struggle against hostile communist forces. As many of you know, the Korean conflict remains unresolved. An armistice ended active hostilities in late July of 1953, but as the uncertainty and ambiguity of diplomatic relations with the North attest, we're still waiting for peace to break out. The massive manpower requirements of the Korean conflict again brought conscription and heavy mobilization. Almost 1,800,000 Americans served in the war, and more than 36,500 died. Massachusetts again answered the nation's call. 134 men from Wayland served during the war, and 2 of them rendered the ultimate sacrifice. During another East Asian conflict waged to defend allies against communist aggression, this time in Vietnam, 4 more men from Wayland perished in the service of their country. Since colonial militiamen stood their ground against British regulars at Lexington Green, Concord, and Boston during our nation's infancy, patriots from Wayland, Massachusetts, New England, and across the land have exemplified the American spirit. Our veterans served their country diligently, sometimes courageously, and occasionally heroically in all our nation's wars, including ongoing anti-terror missions from the deserts of North Africa and the Middle East to the mountains of the Hindu Kush to the jungles of Mindanao. I deployed to Afghanistan in January 2006 with the 3rd Brigade of the 10th Mountain Division, led by a colonel named John Nicholson. He went on to command Allied forces in Afghanistan from the spring of 2016 until last September. But General Nicholson wasn't the only remarkable man in our unit. Our cavalry squadron included an NCO named Jared Monty. He was born in Abington, Mass., and raised in Raynham, that's southeast of here in Bristol County. He enlisted right out of high school, training as a forward observer at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. After initial training, he served as a paratrooper with the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. He subsequently joined the 3rd Squadron, 71st Cavalry Regiment at Fort Drum, New York, home base of the 10th Mountain. Staff Sergeant Monty was leading a reconnaissance mission atop a mountain ridge on June 21st, 2006, in northeastern Afghanistan's Nuristan province. His Medal of Honor citation recounts what transpired that night. Sergeant Monty's patrol came under attack by a superior force consisting of as many as 50 enemy fighters. On the verge of being overrun, he directed his patrol to set up a hasty defensive position behind a collection of rocks. Sergeant Monty called for indirect fire from a nearby support base, skillfully guiding rounds against an enemy that had close to within 50 meters of his position. While still calling for fire, he personally engaged the enemy with his rifle and a grenade, successfully disrupting an attempt to flank the patrol. Sergeant Monty then realized that one of his soldiers was lying wounded and exposed in open ground between the advancing enemy and his man. With complete disregard for his own safety, Sergeant Monty moved from behind the cover of the rocks into withering enemy fire. After closing within meters of his wounded soldier, the fire forced him to seek cover. He gathered himself and rose again to maneuver through a barrage of fire to save his wounded soldier. Relentless fire again drove him back. Unwilling to leave his soldier wounded and exposed, he made yet another attempt to reach him in the face of unrelenting fire across open terrain. He was mortally wounded in this third attempt, sacrificing his life in an effort to save his soldier. Sergeant Monty's heroic acts, immeasurable courage, and uncommon valor inspired the patrol to fight off the larger enemy force. He died a few months shy of his 31st birthday. Jared Monty, promoted posthumously to Sergeant First Class, is buried at the Massachusetts National Cemetery in Bourne. "We represent the greatest power for good throughout the world," wrote Bob Bernard, who graduated from Wayland High School in 1964 and went on to a distinguished 27-year Army career. "As long as there are courageous souls willing to defend their country and the values it represents, with their lives, this land shall not perish from the earth." This monument bears another powerful quotation from Ronald Reagan, who served not only as Commander-in-Chief during his presidency, but as a junior officer in the Army Air Forces. Unsurprisingly, he specialized in PR work. "Freedom is never more than a generation away from extinction," he observed in 1961. "It must be defended constantly by each generation. Those who have known freedom and lost it never know it again." Thanks largely to the sacrifices of our veterans, their families, and their communities, Americans have defended their nation and their liberty across generations and across centuries. May their example inspire courage and devotion worthy of their sacrifice. Thank you for listening. God bless our veterans, their loved ones, and the United States of America.
Thank you very much, Command Sergeant Victor. We will now have the reading of the names of the Wayland residents who died while serving by Boy Scout Troop 1. Right here, if you want to use that.
Charlie H. Allward,
Joseph R. Logie, Spencer Richardson, Albert R. Ringer.
Just keep reading down.
Arthur J. Alfred, Philip S. Burbank Jr., Elliot R. French, George W. Bullock Jr., Alfred J. Galanis Jr., Devins Hamlin, Clifford C. Moore, Thatcher Nelson,
Okay, up here.
Edward I. Loker, James D. Loker, John Mellon, James A. Rice, Hiram L. Thurston, Alpheus Wellington, Benjamin J. Perry, Robert M. Place, Robert J. Ripley, Frank W. Taylor, Andrew T. Thomas, Robert C. Tilson, Donald A. Wing, and Charles K. Warrington. Garrett R. Demolke, and Christopher B. Shea. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe he overlooked the Cold War, so I'll read them. Robert J. Barrett, Roger D. Brown, Daniel B. McNeil, Richard H. O'Brien, David E. Sleeper, and John E. Sullivan. We will now have the rifle salute, followed by echo taps by Wayland High School band members and the American Legion Post 133 Rifle Detail in remembrance of the 100th anniversary of World War I. Please stand, please. Thank you very much. Laying of the wreath by combat veterans Richard P. Turner, USN retired, and Kevin Clark, U.S. Army retired. before we have the benediction, I wish to make an announcement. The Boy Scouts, veterans are invited to a lunch at the Wayland Country Club following this ceremony. That includes families and spouses also. All right, we will now have the benediction by Reverend Alan Baldwin of the Trinitarian Congregational Church. Uncover.
Please join me again in praying to God. Oh God, thank you for your presence in this service. Thank you for each other whom you have prompted to be here. Thank you for those who serve our country, for the faithful ranks of police and firefighters, for the untiring services of school teachers, and especially on this Veterans Day, for all who serve and have served in the armed forces and Coast Guard, on land, on the seas, in the air, who have stood ready to die for country, that our country might continue to enjoy the freedoms you have so mercifully bestowed on us. May all of us here and throughout the land be found faithful in the days ahead by walking in your ways and serving one another to your glory and our enjoyment. We give thanks and pray in the name of the Prince of Peace. Amen.
Please be seated. This concludes the ceremony. I wish to extend my personal thanks to the Boy Scouts Troop 1, Mr. Douglas Levine from the Board of Selectmen, Command Sergeant Major Pantagro from Natick Labs, Mr. Joe Onachuk and his trumpeters, and especially Arden Morgan for that beautiful rendition of the national anthem. Also, over in the Trinitarian Church, there is a wall set up over there with pictures of all the veterans and what they did in the military. Please, if you wish, take some time to go over there and view it. And also, I want to thank Waycam for providing a videographer for us. And also the town's facility department for giving us some nice shelter and proper seating. Thank you very much for coming.